All right, good afternoon, everybody. Got a nice sunny day here in Wisconsin. We're going to go over some global price updates. It was around this time last year that we sat and kind of encouraged guys not to be heavy sellers. U.S. was getting pretty cheap on the world market, and as we turned the calendar into August, that's when these markets really started to take off. So we're getting into that time frame again, and what we wanted to do is just kind of look back at a year ago where prices were at and what we're starting to see this year. So come over here, we take a look at corn. This is what really started that rally last year. We've always said the 350 is going to encourage a lot of demand, and as you can see, the U.S. was the cheapest in the world market. You had Argentina close, but our export prices were available and cheap, and that's where importers are going to go. They look for what's the cheapest. Now you compare that to where we're sitting at for this year, and you'll notice Argentina has no offers right now. Brazil is quite a bit higher than the U.S., but Ukraine is quite a bit cheaper, at least until through the September months, until we get into October and November. So this has us a little bit cautious on the corn market, where last year we were the cheapest and leading, able to lead prices higher. As we sit here and kind of churn around at the top, we got to be a little cautious and say, wait a minute, yeah, we are beating South America. That's, seems to be, I wouldn't call it obvious, but it seems to make sense when you hear about the crop production issues they're having. But then we also need to take a step back and look at Ukraine and see that they're offering corn quite a bit cheaper due to their large production. And when you factor in freight costs, it makes a little more economic sense to import bushels from Ukraine. So a little hesitant, or I guess a little cautious here on corn as we consider the global prices going forward. Here's your corn chart from last year. As you can see, corn really kind of led this rally up, and now we've started to sell off as we have, of course, increased our ending stocks number with the higher acres. But again, as well, going forward, keeping an eye on these global prices. If we're not going to be the most competitive on the world market, is that where we start to see prices turn down a little bit? On the bean side here, 2020, we were competitive with Argentina and blue Brazil right out of the water. So again, this is supportive of those prices last year, in that we were able to pick up export business as months went forward. We started to get a little bit cheaper, and we're certainly competitive with South America when it came to beans. Now things are looking pretty good here on the bean side of things. As you can see, for 21, the U.S. is well ahead of Argentina and Brazil on global export prices. So this is where a person can argue that beans have a little bit more support, and again reinforces our point as to why we're buying puts. On the one hand, you sit out here and we hear that South America has a large crop, which makes us a little bit cautious that they could come in and start to underbid our prices. But at the same time, that's currently not the case. As you can see, U.S. export prices are the cheapest. So that's why we like these puts, depending on China coming in and buying. And as we move through the year, where these prices go, that's where we can see these swings, certainly above $15 or even below 13 or 12. So that's why we like these puts in place. But right now, it looks like the bean market has some support based on the U.S. being the cheapest in the world market. Again, here's a quick look at that bean chart. You can see a pretty clear breakout run last year into the highs this year, where beans have held together a little bit better than maybe corn. Wheat was mostly just along for the ride. Last year, not competitive at all. Russia and Ukraine kind of dominates the market. And again, this year, you have Russia and Ukraine quite a bit cheaper than the U.S. here going forward. So again, we're a little more cautious on wheat, but if corn, especially with corn having issues too, this is where again we can see these downside pressure on corn and wheat prices. So the July weekly continuous wheat chart from last year, certainly not as clean of a breakout. We had the big run up to $7, but since then have sold off dramatically. And again, a lot of that has to do with the fact that the U.S. wheat product is just not as competitive compared to, say, corn or beans, frankly, throughout most of the year. So although corn, again, isn't competitive now, it's been competitive at points, and that's why you can get those better levels of support in here. So kind of wrapping up, this is something we started paying attention a lot closer to, especially since 2019. But again, recapping last year, U.S. was cheapest on the world market and certainly competitive, which helped rally these prices. Right now, as it sits, we have the cheapest beans, which is certainly bullish and supportive beans. But on the other hand, we also have a little bit more expensive on the corn and wheat side of things, which can certainly put some pressure on prices. We also have to ask ourselves, is China going to continue to buy in large amounts, especially when you talk on the corn side of things? I believe they imported a record amount of corn last year. So do they really need to import another record amount this year? Their production is also on the corn side supposed to be higher. So with China, as always, you kind of have to take a wait and see approach, but those are some things that are floating out here in the market that we need to be aware of. And then finally, you have to look at the global commodities. What makes economic sense? Essentially, you have a few countries that are able to export these grains, and they're the world's supermarket. And 9 times out of 10, these countries are going to go where it is the cheapest and most cost effective to purchase the grains. So we need to keep that in mind, that although we take pride in what we grow here in the U.S. and things of that nature, at the end of the day, when they're out shopping for imports, they're going to put their calculator down and figure out what makes the most cost-effective sense, which is why we need to pay attention to these global prices. It is a global marketplace out there, and how things are going to move through the supply chain. So we'll probably do another one of these updates here in the next couple of weeks and see where things are at. But it was about this time last year, kind of early August, really, when you started to see the rally. Again, this point here isn't to say that we're going to head straight down from the prices that we're at. That's not the point at all. What we're just trying to illustrate is that perhaps highs can be in on corn and on wheat. Beans certainly have a little more volatility available to them. And if there is going to be some downward pressure, look at these world prices to be leading some of that downward pressure in here. So again, we appreciate your time. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You guys will get notified when we post these new videos. If you have any questions, feel free to email them us, admin@prime-ag.net, and we will have that in the description below. Thank you.